Regarding France, we are so fortunate to have with us this morning preeminent researcher Gildas Bourdais. He's the author of 5 books published from 1994 to 2004, with a new book coming in the fall of 2007. He's written articles in English for the MUFON UFO Journal and the International UFO Reporter, among others. He is particularly known for his summary of the Cometa report, which was initially circulated in late 1999. I strongly encourage all of you to pay close attention to the actions of the French government. From the Cometa report to the release of classified sighting reports by the CNES, France, is sending a signal to the U.S. government that patience with the truth embargo is near an end. This will be very interesting to watch, and that's a view that many experts do share. Monsieur Bourdais will talk about all of that and much more. Please welcome this mild-mannered but fiercely devoted researcher to X-Conference 2007.
Please excuse my French. I am not completely fluent in English. So. Oh, do you hear me? Yes. All right. So I am going to try to be as clear as possible. So you see the title of this presentation, The Death and Rebirth of French Official UFO Studies. That's the little story I'm going to tell you now. And it is a rather unusual story. There is no real equivalent in any other country, so it's a kind of interesting story. And what happened is that in March 2007, there was France drew attention, international attention, by announcing that it was going to disclose all its its official UFO studies on the internet, on the website of the French National Center for Space Studies. So that was quite an interesting move. And if I can find how to reach the next slide, yes. That should be. You see, the American IUR, International UFO Reporter, summarized this in its front page. The subject of the talk.
If you want, just hit this button.
This one?
This one here. And then it'll go forward, backwards.
Forward, yes, yes.
So, yeah, so forward and backwards. Okay.
Very well.
Forward, backwards.
Okay, okay.
Then it's easy, you don't have to play with the mouse.
Yes.
Sorry.
And what happened is that what I'm going to tell you in more detail is that there was an official service created 30 years ago at the French Center of Space Studies, a little French equivalent of the NASA, if you like. So just imagine that NASA would have created 30 years ago an official service for the study of UFOs, and that NASA would be now publishing all its files. But it is at a French scale, but it is what is happening. And what happened is that there were some hesitations, and there were some fights in France for or against these UFO studies, to the point where the service was closed for a while in 2004. That's the meaning of this title. Is France going to bring to stand back UFOs in the cosmos? But then there was the rebirth of the French service. So this is what I am going to explain now. Why did this happen in France? How did it happen? And what is the situation now? So the rush for the French UFO files means that they announced that they had 1,650 cases, and with more than 6,000 testimonies to be put on the web. That's about 100,000 pages. So it's a pretty heavy job, especially that it is a small team. And you can access, well, about, I would say, 500 pages at this present time on this website of CNES, that means Centre National d'Études Spatiales, well, in English, French, National Center for Space Studies. Here is the announcement on this website of CNES. So the study of PAN, P-A-N, which means in French unidentified aerospace phenomena. Unidentified, yes. And that's the title of CNES, the French Space Agency. That's the meaning, unidentified aerospatial phenomenon. Phenomenon being the singular of phenomena, in case some people don't know that. But OVNI in French, UFO, that's OVNI means objet volant non identifié. And GEPAN is Group for Study and Information on Unidentified Aerospatial Phenomena. Oh, that's it for the vocabulary now. Let's keep going. And here is an article to give the mood in the French press. It was pretty well welcome in the French press, like in this article. So, well, the UFO archives, the French UFO archives are going on the internet. And here is, I want to give an idea of the French Center for Space Studies. It's not just studying in offices, it's also operating, the launching of rockets in French Guiana. You see the biggest one here, the Ariane 5 rocket, here on takeoff, which is a pretty big rocket, able to launch 10 tons in orbit. So France is not alone, and it is a European program with all main European countries in it. Here is just a little view of the offices in Toulouse, France. You know that Toulouse is the kind of capital of aerospatial activities in France with the Airbus company. So now let's go back to the story. So it started in 1977 with the creation of a little group, GEPAN, created by Yves Sillard, then Director General in French, Director of CNES, who appointed a young engineer. So here is Yves Sillard now, recent picture now, he's a retired man. And I have a good contact with him, by the way. One thing I must say is that this talk is a personal presentation. It is not an official presentation, but I sent him my text and he globally approved it. So it's not official, but it's more or less approved. And so back in 1977, there was this young engineer who was very interested in UFOs. He had met Alan Hynek, who had interested him, and he had read the Condon report, but I had found that there were very interesting cases. So there was already there were some people in France who were really interested in UFOs, and it goes back to many years before. So it is a rather different situation. That's what I want to explain in France, because in the United States, there is a very strange situation that there is a lot of ufological activity, like we can see here at this conference, and yet the American government still denies the existence of UFOs. This is not the case in France. It has been, well, more or less officially accepted since at least 30 years now. But what happened is that this little service was quite active and had the opportunity to make some very interesting study some very interesting cases, like some that I will present briefly at the end of this talk. And so it drew attention in France, but maybe a little too much, because obviously there were some people, many people in fact, in the scientific and intellectual community who were quite hostile to this. So we see already at that time a kind of difference of opinions between the scientific and intellectual world, who rather hostile to UFOs, very rationalist-minded, and people in the industry, aerospace industry, who were quite interested on the contrary. But the result was that after a couple of, well, a few studies which were very, very interesting, there was a backlash, and the service had a reduced activity. There was the chief engineer left, and there was only one man left, Jean-Jacques Velasco, who, well, was with very limited authority. One of his activities, in fact, was to take care of the debris of rocket debris. You can see him showing one here. So it was not even a full-time job, UFOs anymore, you see. But then there was a surprise in 1999, the Cometa report that probably some of you have heard about. Who has heard about the Cometa report? Quite a few people. And it was published suddenly in the middle of 1999 without previous announcement, and it asked for a rebirth of French UFO studies. Here's the cover of the UFOs and Defense. What are we to get prepared for? And here are some of the authors of this interesting and surprising study. You have here some people who, not all the authors, but I can present them briefly. Here is at the left, you have a senior chief engineer in aeronautics. All these people with really very competent people in their field. Here's the lawyer of the Cometa, Michel Agrin, whom I know well. General Letty was a senior officer, general of the Air Force, who is the leader of the group here. He's still active. Admiral Merlot, who is deceased now. And here, a very competent general engineer for armaments, Alain Orzag. So, and here you see some people who were outside but who supported the Cometa, like here André Lebeau, Professor André Lebeau, a very high-level scientist. Here you have an astronomer, Jean-Claude Ribes, about whom I am going to talk again later. And General Norlin, who was at least, I think, a 4-star general, General Bernard Norlin, who encouraged the study. So this is just to show that there is a different situation in France at that time already. Again, I would say. And these people said, yes, we should study again. This is General Norlin. We should launch again the official study of UFOs. But here you see, as an example, that not everybody received well this study. And here you have an article in one of the major weekly magazines in France, L'Express, kind of equivalent of Newsweek for France, which said UFOs, a delirious report. Why did they say that? Well, in very few words, because the committee said 2 or 3 or 4 things. There are UFOs, they are real, they are probably extraterrestrial, and there is a big problem of UFO secrecy in the United States. That was the message, the main message of the committee. And there was an almost instant reaction of hostility from some quarters, and you see an example of that here. But let's go on with the story. So that was in 1999, and apparently nothing happened, but in fact, yes, there was a lot of reflection, what should we do, etc. And you have here in 2002 an article in the major daily paper, Le Figaro, rather right-wing newspaper, who said, well, UFOs, the state must give more means of study. So, strangely enough, I would say, curiously, it's rather right-wing people like all these general officers and this newspaper who push for the study, whereas left-wing people in France, like the intellectual left-wing people, are very hostile to that. Why is that? So I think that there is a simple explanation. It's because, especially in France, the intellectual world is very claims to be very rationalist, and they don't like at all that sort of story, like UFOs, paranormal, etc. But that was not all. What happened next was that Jean-Jacques Velasco, the engineer I presented earlier, who after almost 20 years at the head of the little French service, he had been criticized by ufologists for being skeptical and retaining information. Well, what happened is that he decided to come out and say his opinion, and the opinion was that yes, there are UFOs, yes, they are most probably extraterrestrial. So he was in fact quite in the same line as, or almost in the same line as the committee after so many years. But this book, which was published in 2004, had an immediate result, which, here is Jean-Jacques Velasco again, which was that the closure of the little service, which was then called SEPRA. So you see an article of the magazine, the Ciel et Espace, Sky and Space, which is well distributed in France, and which reflects well the opinion of the scientific world. You see that they kind of they did an article with a rather aggressive title, CNES buries UFOs. But so some people were quite satisfied with that decision, but that was not the end of the story. Because in 2004, 6 months later, in 2004, the Figaro again put the subject back on the table, saying, well, those UFOs trouble the French National Center for Space Studies. And, well, so there was a kind of fight in the French media. Here you have an example of a left-wing magazine, the Nouvel Observateur, which about the same time at the end of 2005 had published that kind of article, UFOs are lost at last in the... What about if we were alone in the universe? You see, that reflects well the mood of many people in the intellectual world in France. But what happened is that there was a study ordered by the CNES, but the new director of CNES, which concluded that yes, gave a favorable advice to the rebirth of the of the study of UFOs at CNES, and this is what happened. In 2005, it was launched again with new people. And these new people were Jacques Patenay, who replaced Jean-Jacques Velasco. Well, he's not a very young man, as you can see, 59, but he had the mission to reopen the service, and he was directed by, he is still today, that's the situation today now, under the supervision of a steering committee, which is headed by the very man who created the first service in 30 years before, Yves Sillard. He's now retired, but he is very interested in UFOs, and he pushes in a positive way for UFO studies. So the same magazine here, Ciel et Espace, which was quite aggressive a year before, had to change completely direction and announce that the CNES opens its file now. So what I am trying to show here is that there is a kind of competition of continuing fight in France for or against UFOs. It's quite a different situation because, curiously, well, as compared with the United States, because very curiously, it is official people who push in favor of UFO studies. So you have a new article of said, yes, we must admit that we don't know everything, of Jacques Patenay. And here you have an interesting example. Again, L'Express, the trendy magazine center, politically at the center, I would say, which was quite hostile, which had been very hostile to the Cometa report, as you have seen. It was, they published a very positive 6 pages article, UFOs, Archives to Explore. It was really a change of mood. But the fight is not over yet, because another magazine of large distribution, Science et Avenir, published this, look at this cover, Why UFOs Have Disappeared. That was in 2006. So the fight was not finished. No? And it is not, as I speak. As of today, it's still going on. Now, in this magazine, there was an article, for instance, of sociologist Pierre Lagrange, who is kind of very ambiguous author. Like you see on this title, The Flying Saucer was born in June 1947. So he has an approach which pleases the intellectual world. But if you read the article, you go to the end of the article, you realize that he doesn't say there are no UFOs. No, he says, well, yes, UFOs maybe, but we cannot understand anything about them. We are like monkeys. We cannot understand. That's about the philosophy of this man. And here you have again the director of this magazine, Ciel et Espace, who had been hostile to UFOs all the time. But then he had to change a little his stance on UFOs. And here is a little story of which I am directly a witness, because it was TV program which was aired in last March, a well-known program of good quality, presented by this journalist Yves Calvi, and it was very funny because there were 4 guests, Jacques Patenay, this man that you have seen, Alain Sirou, and Pierre Lagrange, and me. And this journalist turned toward Jack Pattonay and asked him, well, are there UFOs? And he was obliged to say yes, but we don't know what they are, but yes, they are UFOs. And then he turned toward Alain Sirou and he raised the same question and he added, be careful about what you answer because you may lose your job. So it was very funny because he was very embarrassed, this journalist. But there are other episodes, more recent episodes of this kind of mediatic battle. I must say that at the end of June, this is very recent now, there was a big program on the French national television, the FR3 channel, end of June, which was very favorable to skeptics. Like one of the guests, who is Henry Brock. Who is Henry Brock? Is a scientist who specialized in the very negative study of all paranormal things, including UFOs. And he was one of the major guests at that show. So we all realized then, I mean the ufologists, that the battle was not finished yet. However, but quite recently, in last August, the newspaper Libération, which was quite skeptical a few years ago, changed its mood again, and they interviewed me. They gave me one full page. And so this is a curious situation. We don't know yet how it's going to evolve in the next months and years. But it's a mixed bag, and I think that overall the recreation of the French service and the publication of its files on the internet are a very positive event which has brought a renewed interest in France for UFOs. And now, I don't know if I have much time left. Perhaps you could tell me. All right, 30 minutes? Very good. What I would like to show now is some of the... So what's going on the website of CNES? You have here a chart of the studies already published. That's about 500 files. It's only one fraction of all the files available. It takes a long time because they have to delete all the names, addresses, and things like that. So it takes quite a long time. Now, they had warned, since the beginning, Jacques Pattonay had warned that we are not going to find any new spectacular case because the really spectacular cases were actually had been already published. I am going to show a few of them. But at least we have now access to a lot of official documents like this. This is a report of the gendarmes. Gendarmes are the military police. The military police, the Gendarmerie Nationale, is officially in charge of collecting the reports. And so they are still doing that job. They were doing it already in the 70s, and they have kept doing the job. This is the kind of document which is rather boring reading, I must say. But one very interesting aspect of this new publication is that they have completely changed their evaluation of the number of unknown cases. Here you have the statistics now published on the official French website of National Center for Space Studies. And what does it say? It says that about 28% of their UFO files are unknown, unidentified flying objects. 28%. And the other categories are A, and in blue, perfectly identified. In violet, you have probably identified. And in C here, in gray, you have cases with insufficient data. So it is quite new, and I would like to remind you of the previous figures on the number of unidentified flying objects. As you probably know, during many, many years, decades, it was an accepted fact that there were about 5% of unidentified flying objects. That was the figure, 5.5%, in the archives of Blue Book, which had more than 12,000 cases. So we lived with that. But actually, when you go back to more precise figures, we have much higher percentages. Now, for instance, in this book of Yves Sillard, who published a very interesting book, that's another aspect of the French situation. There have been several books published by Yves Sillard and his colleagues, and also by Velasco, I mentioned, which give already very high figures, like 14% of UFOs. But when we go back, so this new figure of 25 to 28% is really a surprise, because even last year we were still at 13, 14%. But if we go back in time, you had in the United States a very important study which was called Special Report 14, published in, it's a study which was made by the Battelle Memorial Institute in the 50s for the Blue Book. And they found 25.5% already at that time of unknown. So we are finding that kind of figures now for the French files, interestingly. Now, what I would like to stress is that there are different opinions, even among people who are interested and who are studying UFOs. And this book, which is a collective book, reflects that. So what I would like to show now is that there are several people here who are quite positive on UFOs, like Yves Sillard himself. And I would like to quote one of his words here. On page 19 of the book, he says this: ETH being the only hypothesis which, at the present stage, brings an eventual perspective to explain the phenomena, the existence of which is indisputable, an attitude of frightened rejection without examination doesn't seem to be the good approach, however. So that's a kind of tone, you see. And the year before, he already had given an interview which was even stronger. He said he talked about the problem of UFO secrecy, and he said, the climate of suspicion and disinformation, even derision, that dismisses witness testimony and stems from yes, it announced that it stems from surprising intellectual blindness. So it was pretty strong words. There were strong words. And in that team, there were other, well, here you have the cover, the new cover of the book of Velasco, which has been published again. And I will come back in just a moment. I would like to give another example of one of the authors of the book of Yves Sillard. This man is the astronomer Jean-Claude Ribes, who published a long time ago already a book on the extraterrestrial life, and which already said, yes, there are UFOs. There was a couple of chapters on that. So there is a kind of tradition, even if they were a minority at the time, of people in the scientific world who expressed positive views on UFOs. But it was a kind of minority. Now, is it going to become a majority? That's, I think there is still some way to go. But it is progressing. It is progressing. Now, oh, wait a minute. There is another author in that book, whom I know well, who is a friend, who had written a book, a very strong book against disinformation, UFO, 60 years of disinformation. It was published by a good French publisher. And he is in the book of Yves Sillard. So you see, there is a kind of gathering of people who push somehow towards what is the subject of this conference, this UFO disclosure, in fact. Well, it's still too early to say if they are going to succeed. Well, we ask a number of people who push in that direction now. And the book of Velasco, I will come back just 1 second to it, because it is a really interesting book, coming from a man who was during 20 years at the head of the French service. You see, there is a picture of a nuclear bomb. That's not by kind of hazard of chance. It is because he has stressed that question of observation, surveillance of all nuclear activities by UFOs. This is a subject he has been studying quite a lot, and about which Robert Sala is going to give a very strong example. And your case is mentioned in the book, by the way. And I did that too in my books also. So what we have here is a situation of, in France, rather different from some other countries. And now I still have some time, I think, to present a few cases, very interesting cases, observations which were studied by the French service, so the GEPAN, in 1981. The most famous case probably is the case of Trans-en-Provence, a small village in the south of France, which was a brief apparition of a small UFO like this here. This was drawn by the witness, who was an old retired man working in his garden. Here is this little house, and you have here perhaps I can point to it a little better, if you don't see it clearly. This is the place where the UFO landed briefly. The man was working here, and he saw it during maybe not a long time, but and the UFO arrived. The UFO arrived this way, above the trees. It landed briefly there, and went again. You see the drawing of its trajectory, according to the witness. Now, a witness is just a witness, but what happened in this case is that there was a landing trace, a round landing trace. And the French gendarmerie came quite very quickly to study the trace and measure it. And there also collected plants around the trace. You have here a table of many plants which were collected at various distances from the center, you see, at several places like that. And then these samples were directed to a French laboratory which was working with CNES, with Japan, which was headed by Mitchel Gildas, a very competent biologist. And they made very competent and detailed study of these plants, and they found that they had very strange effects on these plants, like electromagnetic effects. But of course, the skeptics denied all that, as usual. But it still is a very strong case. It has been translated in English. It is available in English, the report of the Japan. Here is another case which has been confirmed by Jacques Patenay at the program, the TV program. I was next to him, and he confirmed that, yes, there was, in the 70s, the exact date I don't remember, but I can tell you, it was in 1977, French Mirage 4, little nuclear bomber that you can see here, was had a really very close encounter with a big UFO. And they were very impressed, the pilot. You see here as a young pilot, Colonel Giraud, and it is a very well-documented case. So we have there's an example of strong aviation cases. There are many others, actually. And this is the reason why the officers like General Leti, he told that to me. I met with him several times. That's because there were some very strong aviation cases that they launched the study which led to the Cometa report. Here is another example of a strong case, curiously named L'Amarante. L'Amarante is the name of plants which were around a little UFO which landed briefly in a little garden in the city of Nancy in the east of France. And there was one witness, but he is a scientist. So it is actually a strong case, a very strange one. It was a small UFO, something like this, you see. And it came out of nowhere and remained during 20 minutes in stationary flight, silently, under the nose of that man who was completely stupefied. And he tried to take a picture, but he couldn't. The camera was blocked. He looked around and saw effects on the plants, like the plants underneath were standing upright, like if there was a strong electromagnetic field. Then the UFO departed, and there were effects on the plants. They collected plants around, which were close to the UFO, called the Amarante. I don't know the English name, if someone knows what Amarante are. Well, there were effects on these plants, something comparable to the plants at Trans-en-Provence against electromagnetic effects. So this is another strong case which led to a study, to the report which was published. These are two of the cases which stirred attention in the beginning of the 80s and led to a strong reaction and the reduction of activity of Japan. I mentioned that earlier. Now, if we go back in time, this is here another example I like to talk briefly about, because in a little village in the south of France, again in 1965, there was a close encounter with landing traces. It is a very famous case. The witness that whom you can see here, Maurice Mass with gendarme, was a very serious man, a good farmer, cultivating plants of lavender. Like in this area, there are lots of there is a lot of lavender. And this man, early in the morning, was going to his field, like you can see here, with the plants of lavender, and he saw a UFO on the ground. He first thought it was a kind of vehicle, small vehicle, but when we approached, he saw it was a very strange vehicle, and there were two little beings near it. And they noticed him. They directed a sort of instrument at him, which paralyzed him. And they quickly entered the craft and left. But you see the result here is that on this ground, during several years, there was very strong effect on the ground, and the lavender couldn't grow there. It has been studied extensively. There were traces deep in the ground also, like if rather heavy craft had landed there. And this is an example of one of the most well-known cases, and it has been confirmed by the French service, which was created later. They studied back the case, and so they had quite. They still have these cases on file in France. But the question I want to mention to finish, 2 minutes? No? 7 minutes. Okay, fine. I will just eat them and finished. The question to finish my presentation of French files is, well, are there secret files in France? Well, yes, most probably there are secret files. And at least I can give you an example of a missing file. It is the file of a close encounter which happened in the north of France at the time, in 1954, in a little village in north of France. That's, I don't know exactly the place, it's somewhere here. This is the map of all the close encounter which happened during that big UFO wave in France. By the way, there was the same wave in Italy a month later. So it suggests very strongly that there is kind of program. You know, I believe very much in that. There has been a program of gradual acclimatization or gradual presence, and to make us think about what it is, what's going on. And there was a huge wave in France at that time. And here is what was published in the press at the time. Flying saucer, yes, nothing is incredible in the declaration of this guard barrier, which it means the man was he was a worker in steel works, and also he was in charge of a barrier for railway. Next to his little home. And what happened to this man is that one evening he saw a UFO land on the railway tracks. Two little beings come out, which scared him very badly. So he ran to the gendarme to tell his story. He was in a very agitated. And the police, and you see here the police de l'air, the air police, has taken very seriously all this affair. So many official people came to study this, and because there was a landing trace. You can see here, he points to a landing trace, which was on one of these wooden pieces. What's the name in English? All right, thank you. And you see here a close-up, and it is very interesting because you see him here with the gendarme who looks quite meek and smiling. So it was, there was, at the time in France, there was no aggressivity, you know. The gendarmes liked these stories, in fact. And there was a French researcher, journalist named Edgar Mitchel, who has had a couple of books translated in English. Probably some of them have heard of him. He made a very good book on the French UFO wave later, and he studied a case here, and he met with engineer from the French National Railroad Company, and 2 years later, who told him that they had measured a weight of about 30 tons on this mark on the railway. 30 tons. It was a huge, it was not a huge, but it was a very heavy UFO, in fact. And why do I talk about this? Because Jean-Jacques Velasco, in his book I mentioned earlier, talks about this case. He says that when he was in charge of the French service, he wanted to find the file which had been made at the time with gendarmes, the police de l'air, the engineers, and also there was the DST, the French service for surveillance of the territory. Everybody was there. He couldn't find it. He never found the file. So there is a big file which is missing. We don't know where it is. Jean-Jacques Velasco doesn't know where it is. So that's an example of maybe... here is another example of perhaps a kind of dissimulation of real facts. In November 5, 1990, there was a very big wave of observation, which was rather quickly explained as the debris of Russian satellite, which had crossed when it fell from its circular orbit. It crossed France from southwest to northeast. And yes, it is true that many people saw that in the sky, but it doesn't explain everything. That's interesting because Jean-Jacques Velasco accepted that official explanation of space debris, but many ufologists don't. And one of my friends, Joël Mera, here is this picture, is a very good researcher, a field researcher. He has gathered dozens and dozens of testimonies, like this one, for instance, a huge UFO with close to the ground, with lights probing the ground, apparently. So it doesn't at all, cannot be explained with the re-entry, atmospheric re-entry of a Russian satellite. Here is another example, which was, this depicts what some witnesses saw just very near to Paris, above a suburb of Paris. And I know myself 2 witnesses, because I worked in this area, who saw it. And it was a huge, dark something, which crossed the area of Paris, and which has been seen by several witnesses. I know two witnesses, and credible. They don't want witnesses who don't want to express themselves publicly. So we have here an example, I think, of a rather massive wave of UFOs everywhere in France, in all 4 corners of France, of rather massive UFOs, which were so supposedly explained. But another strange aspect of that is that I think that Paola Harris has the nice expression for that, plausible deniability. And my friend Joël Mena talks about camouflage. Very often in ufology, you have observations which can be explained more or less by mundane phenomena like re-entry of a satellite. But when you study in more detail, you discover that it doesn't explain all the observations. That's a constant in ufology, I think. And also about UFO secrets in France, and I will finish there. There are a number of witnesses, of testimonies about, for instance, observation of UFOs above the French missile site, which was in south of France on the Plateau d'Albion. I have 6 articles in the local press about that. But there is the official service, even as you saw, which we are willing to publish on UFOs, they don't want to hear about that. They don't know. And there is another example, by the way, in the book of Paola Harris, perhaps you will talk about it, of a witness called Guy Andronik, who was a geophysicist in the who worked on the French nuclear test in the Pacific Ocean. And he says that there were several observations of UFOs at the time in the 60s above the nuclear sites in the Pacific. So here again we have a case of observation of nuclear activities. And yes, if you ask me, are there secret files? Yes, there must be also. But it says in France, but not at the scale of the United States. You know, I don't think there is a French ROSWELL or cases like that. So here is the French situation. I try to explain. And I thank you very much for your attention.